Good people YouTube, I'm the Watch Idiot, and it's been a pretty awesome few weeks for me with Seiko because I've been loving my SPB259 Willard Ice Diver, which I think has easily the best dial of any Seiko diver, but I had to qualify that it was of any Seiko diver, because the best dial that I've ever seen from Seiko, period, is the Alpinist Ginza Limited Edition SPB259. So in this video, I'm gonna get into what makes this watch so special by getting into the details, especially about that dial, which once again is the best dial that I've seen on any Seiko and almost any Grand Seiko for that matter. Then I will also get into why I think that this family of Alpinists gives us the traditional Seiko value that we once used to know. Also, if anyone wants to buy a $826 Hodinkee Shop gift card for $775, $51 off, let me know, email me, the info is in the description, probably in the pinned comment as well. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so before we dive into the dial, let's get into the dimensions as always, just so we know what we're dealing with here. And yeah, it's an awesome size for everyday use that can be worn on pretty much any wrist, I would say. And the case width comes in at 38.8 millimeters, and the lug is 45.9 millimeters, which is very compact. And all of this is right in my sweet spot. And then also the weight is 143 grams, also my sweet spot. So the thickness actually surprised me quite a bit because it is 13.1 millimeters, and the reason it surprised me is because it really doesn't feel like that at all, and almost doesn't look like that at all. I mean, it feels like just a standard watch in the 12 millimeter range. So yeah, I mean, don't let that number scare you from getting into these watches, because on the wrist it is barely noticeable, and on the wrist it feels pretty much exactly like a Black Bay 58, and the Black Bay 58 is 11.8 millimeters thick. So yeah. And on the wrist is just about as comfortable as any other Seiko watch, which means that it's really comfortable. And I can totally see this or any other of the dial variants being like truly like effortless and purely go anywhere, do anything watches, because it really can be dressed up and dressed down quite nicely. Oh, and it's got the 6R35 movement in there, which everyone has opinion on, but for me, I really like it. It works nicely. It's relatively accurate if you get a good one, and yeah, it's got a 70-hour power reserve, so yeah, I'm all for it. So like I said before, the dials on the other variants are awesome, and I wanted the gray dial so bad, but this limited edition Ginza version is just next level. I mean, I would say even Grand Seiko level. I mean, I've owned 3 and I still have one of their absolute best dials ever, the Kirizuri limited edition. But if we're gonna leave Grand Seiko aside, I will say that this is easily my favorite dial that I've seen on a watch like south of $5,000. I think I can pretty safely say that. Every time I see this dial, I am completely taken by pretty much every single aspect of the dial. I mean, the first thing that struck me when I first saw it is that awesome pattern that I've never seen before on a dial. So yeah, props to Seiko for continuing to make really unique and special dials. So the dial itself has a sort of 8 sections of triangles with a brick pattern in them, but when you see it as a whole, it kind of transcends that description because it ends up being sort of a giant sunburst effect of patterns, if that makes sense. And it's made even better because each of the bricks very subtly have their own level of brushing. So when you see them, they look like individual bricks, which add a level of complexity to the entire dial. And then on top of that, we have beautiful sunburst finish, easily the best I've seen on a Seiko. And then one of my favorite parts is the actual color of the dial, because it's a very subtle neutral shade of blue, but still with some vibrancy with touches of gray in it. So I would say this is easily my favorite shade of blue for watch dials. I wish I could have more of this dial. There are so many design elements on the dial alone, and on paper it sounds busy, but in real life, it all just comes together in a way that feels super cohesive. And if anything, I would even go so far as to say that this is a sort of subtle-ish dial, especially when you see it from a little bit further back. And so yeah, well done, Seiko. And to be honest, I'm kind of amazed that they still haven't released this dial in different color variations, because Seiko always ends up reusing limited edition dials, which can get a bit irritating, but in this case, I am totally down for it. I'm so ready for a gray dial version of this exact Ginza dial. So continuing on with the other parts of the dial, and we have the hands and indices, and I want to talk about the indices first because they were the first thing that I noticed when I saw this new set of Alpinists getting released, because we have the classic triangles at the 6, 9, and 12, which come from the original Laurel Alpinist. And the awesome thing about it is that they have their own bit of design in them, because I haven't seen the sort of indices anywhere else, but the 6 and the 9 have a line splitting them down the middle, and then the 12 has 2 lines making for a diamond and 2 smaller triangles. Oh, and all the indices are raised up as well, just to make it even more three-dimensional, and that's something that I absolutely always love seeing in the dials. And then we have the handset, which I once again really love, because they are simple Dauphine hands that complement the indices, but they have that awesome half polished, half brushed finish that Seiko started doing on their higher end Prospex watches back when the SPB259 and the Willards were released. And yeah, keep on doing that. So there isn't much to say about the case and the bracelet, yet at the same time there is a lot to say about the case and bracelet. And yeah, there isn't very much to say, just because the case is relatively simple as far as Seiko cases go. It's got a classic looking case, classic looking lugs, and with contrasting finishes all over. It looks good, there's no denying that. And the bracelet itself is solid and comfortable, and obviously it looks great. I mean, it's kind of pretty hard to get a 3-link bracelet wrong, but actually they threw in a little bit of their own Seiko flair, because the center links are flat versus the slightly curved outer links, and the interior facets of the center links have a little polished bevel in them, which reflects the light quite nicely. And then also we have a pretty solid clasp. I mean, there isn't very many micro adjust holes, which is a bit of a problem, but it is what it is. I mean, it's Seiko. But yeah, so as it is right now on the wrist, it feels fine wearing it. But there is also a lot to say about these two things, because there are some, I would say, I guess, like lightly glaring issues that could have been tweaked. And the main thing is that the lug width is 19 millimeters. And yeah, I'm a big fan of 20 millimeter lugs. The vast majority of my straps are 20 millimeters. So yeah, I mean, they could have made this 20 millimeters and the design would have been perfectly fine. And then because the lug width is 19 millimeters, the bracelet tapers only 1 millimeter down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. And yeah, 2 millimeter tapers are like the absolute bare minimum for me in order to keep the bracelet flowing visually. But 1 millimeter is basically no taper when you look at it, and it kind of shows when you wear it. Seiko, do better, please. Or throw in some drilled lugs, forgot about that. So if you've been following Seiko over the past few years, you'll have undoubtedly noticed that their prices have been creeping up more and more and jumping up in many cases. And yeah, it's been pretty irritating, because a lot of the watches aren't leveling up the same way that the prices have been leveling up. And but also at the same time, there have been a lot of watches that have been justifying their price increases, and it's just kind of like the SPB259 and the Willards and the Marine Master 200 that came out a few years ago. And yeah, this was a really big deal, because this was the first time that we were seeing regular production divers from Seiko being sold at this just over $1,000 price point, which was really interesting. But the watches themselves were a step up from the rest of Seiko's lineup. So when this new Alpinist came out, it was priced at $750, which was a $250 bump up from the previous generation Alpinist, the Starvo 17, which is one of my absolute core keepers and an incredible watch, an incredible value for the $500 price point. So I was obviously quite a bit skeptical about the $750 price point, but what we got with it is a nice bracelet, and also we have that awesome indices in the dial. And then eventually the prices came down a little bit to around the lines of like $600 or $700, depending on where you get them. I mean, sometimes less than that in Naman. So yeah, I mean, that's especially good when you look at the likes of Hamilton and the other Swiss competitors. I mean, once again, the level of finishing on the dial, hands, and indices are so good. I would have expected the sticker price from Seiko to be much higher, but that being said, I'm happy it isn't. So there you have it. Let me know what you think about the Alpinist lineup and this insane dial down in the comments. And once again, if you want to buy a $126 Hodinkee shop gift card for $775, send me an email. All the info is in the description and probably in the pinned comment. So yeah, as always, remember to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, because it helps the channel a bunch. And then until the next video, good day.